Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. On this, the day after All Saints' Day, the Archdiocese of New Orleans released a list of past clergy linked to improper sexual activity. We will examine the implications. Elsewhere, we'll look at some of the key elections on Tuesday's ballot. We'll also discuss City Hall, where the council heard a report about paid demonstrators and where the mayor wants to reduce the number of traffic cameras. Our Future Watch segment examines some big projects underway in City Park. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources; Stephanie Grace, columnist, The New Orleans Advocate; Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter; and Jessica Williams, reporter, The New Orleans Advocate. We go over to Errol first about this just sad and unsettling story that just sort of keeps on coming. The New Orleans Archdiocese released a list of what they call credible accusations over the past decades against clergy.
Actually, some go back even further than that, but most are in more recent times. The list they had at least had 57 names on it. Of the 57, 30 of them were called diocesan priests. That means that they work for the archdiocese. They don't belong to a particular religious order. The other 25 were priests who belonged to a religious order, and there were 2 who were deacons, and so that was the total. There's a lot of names to sift through, and let me advise everyone that if you want to see and learn more, that the 2 newspapers, the Advocate and NOLA.com, the Times-Picayune, did a very good job today of presenting all the names with photos where they have them and with biographical information. And so if you want to look through them, you can go ahead and do that. Again, my congratulations to both for doing a good job. One surprise, I guess among several, is that there was one order in particular, not a well-known order, but it's a big order globally, the Salesians, that there were 7 names on that list. And it was the Salesians. It was an order that started during the Industrial Revolution with the mission of taking care of kids who were sometimes just left out in the cold during that time. And they operated Hope Haven in Marrero. And so there were 7 names. And then there's also one Dominican who worked there. So it was a total of 8 priests who were on this list who were accused. And so that seems to be fairly disturbing. That particular property today fell into disrepair. It's a beautiful Renaissance type sculpture, and Jefferson Parish leased it about a year or so ago, and they're making it into parish offices. But it's a nice piece of property, and so it doesn't exist for its original purpose as an orphanage. Among the other names, anybody, depending on, if you're Catholic, where you grew up, where you went to church, and where you went to school, will recognize names from your particular parish. One person who had, I think, sort of like a citywide name was Father Bernard North, who was the president of Loyola. And he resigned in 2003 after there were accusations that when he had been working in Indiana, that he had some sort of a relationship with 2 boys. The archdiocese called him in, and he denied it. He's still alive, and he's not a priest anymore. He's a businessman in Florida. And the newspapers contacted him, and he still denies it, even though that the investigations of 2 archdioceses seem to think that there was something else that was going on. Just a kind of like a personal observation. There's another priest in there, a guy by the name of Richard Nowry, who was the pastor of Holy Name of Jesus Church on Canal Street. And that was under the Holy Cross Fathers. And I happened to be there the day when the provincial came in and addressed the congregation and said that Father Nowry had been removed. Now, he was a beloved man.
And that was Sacred Heart, not Holy Name.
I'm sorry, Sacred Heart, yeah, okay. He was a beloved man and just very popular. And he told them that he was removed because of implications with some sort of activity. He told the parishioners it was nothing that happened in New Orleans. It happened years ago, but he's been removed. He's working at the provincial offices with a clerical job and nothing that involves working with children. But I remember for the parishioners, it was just very, very emotional. I mean, they'd never really heard this up front and close up with a provincial coming in and telling you. And I remember some guy just yelling out, from the congregation. And I don't know exactly what he yelled. He was mad at something, and he was probably mad at everything. I mean, he was probably mad at the priests and mad at the province and mad at everything. But it was just a very distressing moment. I remember people leaving with tears, and so you kind of saw the emotional impact of all of this.
And one thing that was interesting from looking at the list is 57 names. It listed where they worked, where they were assigned, and in some cases it was, 6 schools or churches, 8, 13, and, when you think of all the different kids that these people were exposed to these priests, and it's really kind of shocking that way.
Of course, the Archbishop said that, he spent a lot of time in prayer and thought about how to go about releasing these names. And also he points out that there, in the past 10 years, have been no credible accusations as such. So it's just very difficult circumstance all around.
And over the last month or so, the Clarion Herald, which is the newspaper of the Archdiocese, it's been they didn't bury it. I mean, they had a front page story about this was coming and what the process was. And what they did is they selected a committee that had some religious people, but some independent people who were going through it. They had a list of 1,000 or so potential names, and then they narrowed it down to the 57. Where this all goes, we don't know. A good many of these people on this list are deceased now.
The list has been referred to the district attorney. So what he does with that, what he can do with that, of course, is one question to come.
But many of them are deceased.
Of course.
And then some, it's a different case. If it's there's less information known if the clergymen belong to a religious order. It might be somewhere else in the world than if they belong to the dioceses. So there's a lot more to this process coming on, and who knows, it may waken up some thoughts from people who had similar experiences, and so we may be hearing even more.
As you said, a lot more to this whole process that'll be coming forth. All right, Errol, thanks a lot. Jessica, over to you. There was a report that came out, and it was a report that had been commissioned more or less by the council. This is regarding paid actors who were participating in a council protest or in a council hearing regarding Entergy's natural gas plant. What did the report tell us?
The report told us some of what media outlets in town had discovered already from looking at the documents that had been released by the City Council beforehand. But the ultimate conclusion of the report was that Entergy knew or reasonably should have known that the contractor that it hired would in turn literally hire professional actors to read from scripts to support Entergy's position. The report also revealed text messages that had never before been released from former Entergy CEO Charles Rice, who resigned in August in the wake of all of this controversy, in which he told one of his chief executives dealing with communications if Hawthorne Group of Virginia, which was the contractor that they hired, could get more people to show up for a hearing on the power plant that Entergy wants to build, then I'll pay. This is a war. We need all the foot soldiers on the ground that we can muster. And particularly that characterization of his company's advocacy for this power plant as being a war, whether that be a war against the opponents of the power plant who had grown in opposition and in strength in an organization over the past 2 years, or on, as the council members said this week, on the council itself, on the community itself, we don't know. But particularly troubling was that characterization that he used and the very political approach that he applied to the whole process. And as a result of it, the council ultimately walked into the meeting with a resolution that it was going to fine Entergy $5 million, which would have been their largest single penalty ever, but only a small percentage of Entergy's overall profits every year. But after testimony, after people got up during that meeting and said, if this would have been in a court of law and we would have had credible evidence of a fraud on the court, it would have been tossed out. Why don't we just redo the vote all over again? Let's talk about this gas plant and get actual people in the room as opposed to paid people in the room. 2 council members said they'd be open to doing just that. And so where the process goes from here, I think there's going to be a lot of conversations in the coming weeks about whether the council will indeed revisit this and what an eventual reconsideration might look like, in addition to the $5 million fine that's being
And Jessica, wouldn't you agree? Like, I know
contemplated.
people that were there that day seemed to think that had Entergy done nothing that day, they would have won anyway, that they had the votes.
Well, the 2 council members who talked about revisiting it both voted for it, and they really said we didn't listen to the paid people, we listened to the experts. So I think the implication is it could well have the same result.
It could well have the same result. I think that there is another contention on the council, particularly of council members who are no longer there, but even of some who are there currently who have sort of observed the process, that there weren't as many options presented. It was either the gas plant or cascading outages. It wasn't the gas plant or, you know, renewable sources and what sort of combination of renewables versus transmission line upgrades could we get in order to bring the system where we want to be. And particularly Susan Guidry, who's no longer on the council, raised the need for more research into the alternative,
Right.
Which is what several of the community advocates have been stressing for, and which they accuse Energy of frankly ignoring and not really diving deeply into.
And of course, we have new leaders on the council, including a new utility chairwoman, Helena Moreno, who's pretty aggressive on all this.
Yes.
Cascading outages, that was a buzz term,
Yes.
certainly among the protests. But Entergy, in response to this report, what are they saying?
Energy, in their very first initial reaction was to cite the report's failure to include evidence that Energy, according to it, definitively did not know that actors would be paid to support its power plant proposal. And that evidence was, you know, as soon as the reports and the rumors began to circulate that people were paid, Energy's communications specialist reached out to the Hawthorne Group and asked them if you know, what's the deal with this? And the Hawthorne Group president said, oh, they're just delusional or lying. And that is what Energy has touted as its, you know, strongest defense of itself. You know, we asked, we didn't find anything. And of course, the two investigators, Matt Coleman, former federal prosecutor, and former Orleans Parish Criminal Court Judge Calvin Johnson, said you shouldn't have taken that company's denial at face value. You should have did your homework.
Okay, so this story too will continue, right?
Yes, it will.
Okie doke. Thanks a lot, Jessica. Stephanie, we have an
Yes.
election day coming up this coming Tuesday. On the ballot, Secretary of State.
Right. This one, too, could continue. If we have a runoff, we probably will, because there are 9 candidates on the ballot. It's something like an open seat. There is an incumbent named Kyle Ardoin. He's not an elected incumbent. He inherited the job from Tom Shedler, who was the elected Secretary of State, who was forced to resign in a harassment scandal. You know, we've seen that all over the country, and this is in some ways being talked about as the year of the woman, not necessarily here. Although it could be that there are a number of female candidates who are pretty strong. We could have a woman in the runoff, 2 women in the runoff,
Well,
perhaps even the first
Let's take a look at
statewide
the
in
slate
quite a
of
while.
candidates. If we want to bring up that graphic of all the
Yes.
candidates that are running for Secretary of State.
So Kyle Ardoin, he's the, again, incumbent in quotation marks. A number of familiar names there. Julie Stokes is a state representative from Kenner. A.G. Crow is a former state senator from Pearl River. Rick Edmonds is a very familiar face in Baton Rouge. He's a state representative and very involved in the Louisiana Family Forum in, like I said, Baton Rouge. Renee Fontenot-Free is a name to keep in mind. She's the Democrat. She's never been elected to anything, but she's worked in the Secretary of State and Attorney General's office for many years. Given that it's an open primary and there are a lot of Republicans, there's a feeling that she could claim one of those runoff spots. Again, perfectly likely that it could be Renee Fontenot-Free, Julie Stokes, 2 women. We haven't had a woman in statewide office or in Congress, let alone since Mary Landrieu lost, so that would be interesting. With so many candidates, it's very hard to say. It's a low turnout election, probably, but on the other hand, early voting's been very strong, so unpredictable.
The 2 people with a D after their name would have a little bit of a
Advantage.
vote gathering ability because of
They-
just being the lone Democrats.
And there are definitely people who are just going to look for a D.
By the way, if anybody doesn't know what NOPTY means, it means no party.
party.
Yes.
After that, so which is not a key to electoral success.
No, very rarely, yes.
I think the point you make, there's some people will just look for a D. I've actually had people telling me, well, I'm just voting for the Democrat because they are
Right.
registered Democrats.
And if you think back to the last statewide election, special election last year, there was a Democrat who got into the runoff against John Schroeder for treasurer. He didn't even really run much of a campaign, but he was a Democrat, so he got the consolidated Democratic support, and then the Republicans split a bunch of different ways, and then all kind of consolidated behind the Republicans.
The
So
good
that's-
news is that sometimes that's a
pattern.
ticket into the runoff. The bad news is once you get into the runoff, you got no chance. Usually,
Exactly,
so,
yes.
Okay, all righty. Well, Election Day this coming Tuesday,
Yes.
so go vote. Is there early voting over now?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
So Tuesday's the day.
All right. Oh, Dawn, over to you. City Park, a lot going on.
A lot going on. If you take the drive in right past Noma, you can see the lot that is going on. And the biggest development is certainly the Louisiana Children's Museum, which is been under construction there since May of 2017. They are getting ready for a summer 2019, so this coming summer opening. It's a nearly $50 million project that's financed by private money, local and federal grants, and state money. Instead of the small kind of half of a block that they occupy on Julia Street downtown, it's 8.5 acres on a lagoon with walkways and trees, and the museum has planted 125 new trees and kind of built around the existing oak trees in a real contemporary light-filled setting. The walls are up, the roofs are almost on. The buildings are about 55% complete now. A lagoon was drained for this project. It will be refilled. But so really, if you drive into City Park, it looks very different than it did. It's Errol and I were talking before the show about the architectural significance. The Children's Museum had to go back to the drawing board several times with their designs for this building, and it really is going to be a showpiece.
My prediction about that museum, the architecture, is it's going to be nationally important. I think architecture magazines next year will look back and say this is one of the important pieces of architecture in 2019.
It also is expected to draw 250,000 visitors to City Park in its first year alone. Wow. So a real crowd pleaser. The other big project underway right now in City Park is not actually a City Park project, it's a New Orleans Museum of Art project, and it is the expansion of the Bestoff Sculpture Garden. They're currently on 5 acres. They're expanding 6 more acres. Also encompassing a lagoon area just kind of across the way from where the existing sculpture garden is now.
And behind the museum.
And behind the museum. And the new setting will have an amphitheater and stage, bridges and walkways. It, like the existing sculpture garden, will be free and open to the public with the idea of really encouraging other artists to create their art in the park. A Girl Scout cabin on the property is staying in place. Because we've had such a wet late summer, early fall, construction's been delayed a little bit, but they are working hard for an April opening. Both facilities will have some sort of splashy grand opening kind of festivities, but those are underway.
Both of those sound so exciting. I mean, the sculpture garden is, if you haven't been to the sculpture garden,
Wonderful.
It really is just a beautiful, peaceful, wonderful experience.
Well, and City Park really just is a buzz with all sorts of activity, getting geared up right now for Celebration in the Oaks, which, believe it or not, here we go. We're rolling into that holiday season, and Celebration in the Oaks is their biggest annual fundraiser. Gathering in that time about 11 to 13% of their annual budget and 165,000 visitors. So the Children's Museum is going to
Wow,
top
yeah,
that.
really, it's going to bring a whole lot more folks to the park. City Park is such a national treasure. I know, Errol, you're a big supporter, and you know a lot about City Park. It is really such a magnificent green space.
And it's done it pretty much paying its own way.
Right.
Despite its name, it gets very little government support at all, and so it's had to raise its own money.
All right, well, those are 2 new additions that are really going to be exciting to go to.
And both of them opening
Next
very,
year.
very soon.
And children really do enjoy children museums.
Yes,
I know
they
that
do.
My grandchildren just really adore it. They have a great one that they go to in Indianapolis. It's a magnificent museum, but this one is really going to be
This one's
pretty.
going to be very
Yeah.
special, and a lot of indoor-outdoor, which they haven't been able to have downtown.
Yeah, that's really exciting. All right, thanks a lot. Okay, Jessica, over to you. Traffic cameras. Oh, we really don't like our traffic cameras. So they're going to be less in the city of New Orleans if the mayor gets away.
There will be. Mayor LaToya Cantrell proposed a $698 million budget this week that does not include as many traffic cameras as had been in the past. This is a compromise move. It's important to stress that. She originally proposed to take them all down. And after some consternation by some on the council and others in the community who wondered how we would be able to supplement the budget with the funding that we would lose. She then proposed to keep around 11 of the traffic cameras that are not in school zones. These would be in areas where people are most often breaking the law, probably the most popular areas where people are most likely to get ticketed. And then 80 cameras will stay up in school zones, but only in school zone times. So from that 7 to 9 hour window in the morning and that 2 to 4 hour window in the afternoon. Not a lot of people knew, maybe, but those cameras were actually catching speeders all day long, even outside of those school zone times. And now, under the new plan, they will actually just operate within those 2-hour windows. Overall, the changes will mean about $4 to $6 million in lost revenue, which is still far less than the original plan that she proposed, which would have been upwards of 20 million lost had the city taken them all down all at once.
But she's also proposing an expansion of surveillance cameras.
She is, and this is tied in part to her initiative to clean up the city of New Orleans. She's invested at least $1 million into that initiative, and she's hoping to concentrate on specific corridors where she's noticed trash, graffiti to be a big problem. And it's really tied in, as she's described it, also to economic development. She's hoping that, once businesses see that the city of New Orleans and its cares about itself, that they will want to invest here and bring their money here and their time here. And that's part of her budget proposal as well, as is a 10% across the board increase for classified city employees.
Right. But back to the cameras, particularly the surveillance cameras, is this tied into the crime cameras too, or is there a distinction between the two?
The crime cameras that had been around during the Landry administration, those, to my understanding, are still working, still on. She's proposing putting additional cameras or moving them around, if you will, in areas where she's noticed that litter would be a problem. And that would be, again, tied into the Clean Up NOLA initiative.
So these crime cameras that are up there, are we finding that they're preventing crimes? Are we seeing less crime being committed because of them, or is it more of a crime-solving tool?
That's a question that I would like to know the answer to. I think that, the mayor and the police chief have touted the ability of the cameras to catch perpetrators after the fact, to solve cases once they've been once they've already been committed. But I'd be interested to know to what extent the cameras do serve as a deterrent.
Well, I think that those blinking lights that they all have, which you can see from blocks away,
Right.
serve notice that somebody's doing something watching. So I would think in that sense that they serve a message.
And those are a change in the design from the older cameras that we had under the Nagin administration. These are a lot more visible. You can certainly see them surveilling you as you go past, and not just around during Mardi Gras as they were originally, but all year round.
And there's some other non-governmental efforts too for crime cameras with like Project Justice NOLA? And
You can
also
register your private camera
Right.
so that the city knows, they don't surveil it, but they know that they can ask for your footage if they
Right,
want
and
to.
then also putting more cameras in churches and some businesses working together, so we're photographed.
Yes.
Be ready, be
No
prepared.
privacy. Jeez.
All
Stay
right,
inside
Jessica.
with your curtains drawn.
Thanks a lot, Jessica. And back over to staff for a roundup of this upcoming election. We have some other things on the ballot too. Let's start with the clerks. in
Okay,
Orleans.
there are 2 open clerk seats in New Orleans. Very unusual. We had incumbents for a very long time. 2 were elected to judgeships. So there are incumbents who were not elected in these 2 posts, Civil District Court and First City Court, Chelsea Napoleon in one, Timothy David Ray in the other. Interesting thing is that their challengers are really better known in both cases. Jared Brissett is running for the Civil District Court. He, of course, is on the City Council. And Austin Badon, who is a former state representative, is running for First City Court.
And these are pretty tough races too going on. There's some
They
competition.
are. I mean, they're citywide, and these are plum jobs. You hire a lot of people. The public might not see you, but lawyers really care about who's in that job.
All right, and also now statewide, we do have some constitutional amendments. We wanted you to touch on that.
We have 6 constitutional amendments. The first 2 are probably the most interesting. Number 1 would reinstate an old constitutional amendment that was thrown out in court that would basically prohibit people who've been convicted of a felony from running for state office. Doesn't apply to Congress. It used to be that there was a prohibition for 15 years after you completed your sentence. It was thrown out in court, as I said, so now there's no prohibition. A yes vote would reinstate that for 5 years, not 15 years this time.
Amendment 2.
Amendment 2 is the one that's getting all the attention, unanimous juries. Louisiana, one of only 2 states that does not require unanimous juries for a criminal conviction. All kinds of people are coming out in support of this. Most recently, Bill Cassidy, the U.S. Senator. Really very little formal opposition. We'll see what voters do.
And you said there are 6 all told, but
6
just
all
to read up
told.
on the other 4. We're going to move.
Cable, PAR, both have good guides.
Okay. Cable and PAR? Is that
Yes.
what you- okay,
So
doke.
Google them.
Let's, for this conversation, there's one more there
There's,
that we did
and
want
this
to
is
touch on.
not a constitutional amendment.
Right.
But it's a ballot question that will be on every ballot around the state. It is whether your parish, your particular parish, should authorize online fantasy sports contests. So these are things like if you fantasy football, but maybe even for one day, not even necessarily for a whole season. It's not sports betting.
Right.
There's going to be a whole conversation about that later, but this is online.
And then that's
betting.
selecting parish by parish.
Parish
too.
by parish, and then the companies will have to come in and decide and figure out
gonna
a
go
tax
on.
rate, all of that.
All right, quickly, parish president in Plaquemines.
In Plaquemines, very small parish, but always juicy politics. One of the interesting things here, Amos Cormier is the incumbent. Kirk Lapine is on the parish council. Those lawsuits, remember we've talked about them forever. The oil and gas
Yes,
lawsuits are a big issue in this, and there's actually a lot of outside money because the decision is should the parish go forward and continue to try to get damages for environmental damage from these companies.
So that's a contest to watch. And
Yes.
then wrapping up our discussion here, congressional races.
Two in the area, both Steve Scalise up for re-election in the 1st District. He's at the end of the line, but usually that's a bad position, but I think he's probably going to be okay. House Majority Whip. I'll tell you how confident he is. He's campaigning all weekend, but not in his own district, in other districts around the country for other Republicans.
that shows
Especially all his
confidence.
opponents are
As is Cedric
Democrats.
Richmond
As in
campaigning
it's-
for other Democrats.
Exactly.
And then the second district, congressional.
And exactly the same thing. Cedric Richmond, so confident that he is off campaigning for other Democrats around the country. Both of them really want their party to get the majority because they are both real
Powerful
up and comers, and they're
Right.
they're going to end up in good spots regardless. But whoever's in the majority is going to be very powerful.
Real
Never get too
positions of
smug
leadership.
when one of your opponents is named Noonie Man.
Rule of
Okay.
thumb, good
Beware.
rule of thumb.
All right, time to look ahead. E.
There are 9 games left to the Saints regular season. Now, we're all used to noon on Sunday games, but of those 9, 2 of them, including this week, start at 3:25 in the afternoon, and 3 of them start at nighttime, including Thanksgiving night. When
Two
they play,
Thursday night games.
Yeah, when they play Atlanta. So 5 of the next 9 games are not at noon, and then, of course, when the Saints are in the Super Bowl, that'll be a Sunday night.
Sure
Of
would
course.
be. Steph.
We were talking about City Parks funding earlier. There's actually a proposal.
You took it. Go ahead.
It's okay. There is a proposal for voters to give City Park some part of a millage that will be on the ballot. It looks like in the spring.
And that comes up this Tuesday
Comes up.
also?
It comes
It
up. No,
comes
no,
up-
that's
No,
in the
that's
spring.
In the spring.
In
that's
May.
right. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
May 4th.
Okay.
We talked about
Done.
celebration. The Oaks Audubon Zoo Lights is new this year. It's lit up animals at the zoo. That opens November 23rd. I got a sneak peek at some of the lit up animals today. You want to get your tickets and go.
All right.
It's
Yeah,
going to
that
be really
sounds like
cool.
it's going to be beautiful.
Stephanie mentioned the City Park proposition, which will require no new taxes. There is a new tax on the ballot 2 months before that, which is a tax for the Council on Aging that the City
Okay.
Council has backed.
So that'll be next year.
That'll be next year in March, and the City Park Audubon redistricting, which is
Is
not a
in-
new tax, is in May.
And okay, all righty.
Lots
Keep
of things
track
to
of all
vote
these
on.
elections. Okay, thanks a lot, guys, for being here. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Go vote on Tuesday. Have a good evening.